Welcome back, friends. Today we dive into one of the most shocking and decisive naval battles of World War II, the Battle of Cape Matapan, where the proud Italian fleet sailed into what became a deadly trap, and the Royal Navy unleashed a massacre that changed the balance of power in the Mediterranean. Anchor, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps these untold stories alive. It was March 1941. The Italian Navy, confident in its modern battleships and cruisers, sought to strike a blow against British supply lines. Admiral Angelo Cunningham commanded a fleet built around the battleship Vittorio Veneto, one of the most powerful warships afloat. Alongside her sailed heavy cruisers Zara, Pola, and Fiume, with destroyers and escort. Their mission: sweep the eastern Mediterranean, crush British forces, and secure dominance for Italy. But what the Italians did not know was that Admiral Andrew Cunningham and the Royal Navy were waiting. Thanks to intercepted signals and ultra-intelligence, the British knew exactly when and where the Italians would sail. And they had a weapon the Italians feared most: aircraft from HMS Formidable, a carrier that could strike from the skies. The trap was set. British reconnaissance planes shadowed the Italian fleet, while swordfish torpedo bombers swooped in to cripple their giant. In a daring daylight attack, a torpedo slammed into Vittorio Veneto, forcing her to slow and retreat. Later, another strike disabled the cruiser Pola, leaving her dead in the water, the bait for the coming slaughter. Night fell, and with it came doom. The Italians, lacking radar, were blind in the darkness. The British, with radar-guided gunnery, had the advantage. Cunningham's battleships Warspite, Valiant, and Barham closed in silently, their massive guns trained on unsuspecting targets. At point-blank range, the sea erupted in fire. Within minutes, Zara and Fiume were blasted apart, their decks torn by 15-inch shells, fires raging uncontrollably. Destroyers were shattered, crews thrown into the burning sea. By dawn, the pride of the Italian cruiser force lay at the bottom of the Mediterranean, more than 2,000 sailors lost. Cape Matapan was not just a victory, it was a massacre. The Royal Navy had demonstrated the deadly combination of intelligence, air power, and radar-controlled night gunnery. The Italian fleet, humiliated and bloodied, would never again risk a decisive battle in the open sea. The massacre at Matapan proved that technology, cunning, and daring could shatter even the most confident fleet. It marked the end of Italian ambitions in the Mediterranean, and cemented British naval supremacy for the rest of the war. After Vittorio Veneto limped westward, her engines still turning but her speed reduced, Admiral Cunningham ordered his fleet to scatter. He hoped to save his battered ships under the cover of darkness. But fate, and British radar, were against him. The heavy cruiser Pola, struck earlier by a torpedo, remained dead in the water. Admiral Cunningham, not knowing the true scale of the British presence, made a fateful decision. He ordered her sister ships Zara and Fiume, along with destroyers, to turn back and assist. In doing so, he unknowingly sent them straight into Admiral Cunningham's jaws. As night fell over the Aegean, the Mediterranean was cloaked in darkness. The Italians had no radar and no effective night fighting doctrine. Their crews strained their eyes in vain across the black horizon. The British, on the other hand, glided through the night like predators, guided by radar screens glowing in their operations rooms. At 10:27 p.m., HMS Warspite, HMS Valiant, and HMS Barham closed to within 3,000 yards, nearly point-blank range. Their targets had no idea they were even there. Cunningham gave the order, and the night exploded. The first salvo smashed into Fiume, tearing her open with monstrous 15-inch shells. She was engulfed in fire within minutes, her crew fighting a hopeless battle to contain the inferno. Zara followed, hammered mercilessly until her decks were a storm of flame and steel. British destroyers darted in to finish off the stricken ships with torpedoes. Meanwhile, Pola, powerless and stranded, became an easy victim. At dawn she too was sunk, her crew forced into the sea. By sunrise, 3 of Italy's proud heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers had been obliterated. Thousands of Italian sailors perished in the cold waters off Cape Matapan. Admiral Cunningham later remarked on the grim scene. He watched lifeboats and survivors struggle in the water, but with U-boats lurking and the threat of air attack, the British could not linger. The Royal Navy withdrew, leaving behind the wreckage of the Italian fleet and a scar that would haunt the Regia Marina for the rest of the war. Cape Matapan was more than a battle. It was a brutal demonstration of how quickly the balance could turn when technology, intelligence, and surprise were combined. The Italians had sailed with pride and power, but by dawn, they had learned the terrible price of being unprepared for modern war. The aftermath of Cape Matapan was devastating for the Italian Navy. Once regarded as a formidable force in the Mediterranean, the Regia Marina left the battle with shattered confidence. The loss of Zara, Fiume, and Pola, 3 modern heavy cruisers, alongside 2 destroyers and thousands of sailors, struck at the very heart of Italy's naval strength. But even worse than the material loss was the psychological blow. The Italians had entered the war believing in their fleet's superiority in gunnery and seamanship, yet Cape Matapan exposed their greatest weaknesses: no radar, poor night fighting tactics, and a dangerous underestimation of British carrier aviation. The British had turned intelligence from ultra, the striking reach of HMS formidable swordfish torpedo bombers, and radar-guided battleships salvos into a perfect storm. Admiral Cunningham's daring decision to close in at night, bringing his battleships within point-blank range, became a textbook example of decisive naval command. For the Italians, the lesson was bitter. Never again would they risk a fleet action against the British. From that moment on, their capital ships rarely left port without overwhelming caution, and the initiative in the Mediterranean passed firmly into British hands. The defeat at Cape Matapan also had far-reaching consequences. With the Italian navy cowed, the British could move convoys more freely, reinforcing Malta and projecting power deeper into Axis-held waters. It gave the Royal Navy the breathing space it desperately needed in 1941, as the war in North Africa intensified. Cape Matapan was remembered as a massacre, a deadly trap sprung with precision and ruthlessness. It proved that in modern war, technology, and intelligence could overturn numerical parity, and that a single night of violence could reshape the course of a theater. For the Italians, it was a night of fire and loss. For the British, it was one of their most decisive triumphs of the sea. And so, the Battle of Cape Matapan became the turning point of naval warfare in the Mediterranean. In a single night, the pride of the Italian cruiser fleet was annihilated, and the myth of Regia Marina's invincibility was shattered. From that moment onward, the Italians never again dared to challenge the Royal Navy in a head-on fleet action. For Britain, it was more than just a victory. It was a demonstration of how new technology and daring leadership could rewrite the rules of naval combat. Radar, carrier air power, and night fighting discipline had given Admiral Cunningham the edge, and he wielded it with ruthless precision. The Mediterranean would remain contested, but after Matapan, the initiative firmly belonged to the Royal Navy. For the sailors who fought there, it was a night of horror and fire. Thousands never returned, their ships resting forever on the seabed. Yet from their sacrifice, history drew lessons. Never underestimate intelligence, never dismiss air power, and never sail blind into the dark when your enemy can see. The massacre at Cape Matapan stands as one of the most decisive fleet actions of the Second World War, a battle where courage, cunning, and technology combined to spring a deadly trap that changed the course of the war at sea.